going with the format of the modern keynote, I hope to structure my remarks for half an hour and also invite any kind of feedback, if possible, from the people who are attending this today on this Thursday evening. So thank you so much for taking out time. And let me also get into what I hope to address today. It's just to look back from my own personal perspective, but also look at the immense challenges all of us has faced as we have tried to drive towards a level of social change in a year which has completely unseated us, it's challenged us, and brought us to a high degree of uncertainty. So it's been a terrible year. And as much as we surround ourselves with optimism, it actually serves a higher degree of factual accuracy to acknowledge these challenges. So I hope to first acknowledge these challenges and to state it how my own work has led me to understand where technology is moving and what opportunities may lie ahead. So when the pandemic had just started, one of the first things which were forecasted was that it will force us to essentially recast our strategic plans, our financial plans, but much more broadly, there was very engaged political writing, which I saw on the pages of the Financial Times. This was through three op-eds. I think the first was written by Yuval Noah Hariri, and he's quite a bit of a celebrated thinker in the technology communities. A lot of his comments were on how democratic spaces will get challenged in future because there'll be an incredible amount of restrictions which will come through governments, and how technology will play a core part. The second op-ed was by Professor Amartya Sen, who also indicated this is an opportunity actually, because it will force governments to ultimately look at issues such as public health care, which they have neglected for a long period of time. And we are seeing some elements of that. And Arundhati Roy, who actually juxtaposed the present pandemic with pandemics which have happened in the past, and how that changes and transforms societies for good, for worse, for better, but does transform them. So I think in sum total, we've seen elements of that play out as this year is coming towards the end. But we notice things, we may not say it quite openly, but we feel it in our daily lives, in our work, because we are so ambitious. All of us are. My own work hopes to preserve a degree of democratic rights, fundamental rights, which are challenged with technology. It sounds so ambitious, and I'm sure that all of our work, if it doesn't have that ambition, it won't have that goal of going towards social change. So what we have noticed is we are surrounded by threats. We are surrounded by so many conditions which make our day-to-day work difficult. This comes through essentially regulations which may limit funding, which may challenge the democratic space for operations, which may also be limitations on our ability to voice opinions, participate in participatory consultative processes, but we also see opportunities. And what are these opportunities? I think a large part of them are being offered by technology. Because the thing about technology is that it is changing something which is very, very certain in terms of social relationships, in terms of governance. And it's only accelerated due to the pandemic. And this dependency on technology is both an opportunity and a threat. And while digital adoption increases in India, and if one just looks at the statistics over the last 2 years, there's been such a tremendous increase just in terms of the bare number of internet connections in India, reaching close to 600 million. One also notices existing patterns of inequality in distribution of this transformational technology. For instance, people in Delhi may have more than one internet connection, and they do, because we know people in metropolitan cities who do. But people in the other parts of India may not even have the infrastructure for internet connectivity. This includes close to 22,000 villages, which are yet to have infrastructure for internet connectivity. So even if we conceptualize that there may be an affluent family or a sarpanch in that village with the ability to purchase even a cheaper smartphone and get a 4G internet SIM, they may not still get online. So the opportunities which are being quite often offered by the internet may actually revisit the same inequalities in our society as have existed for a long period of time. And they only get more exaggerated with the pandemic because remote learning, as well as education, competitive exams, job opportunities, professional work, or just pure civic participation today is becoming increasingly dependent on these technologies. So while access is an issue on which all of us need to work with, and the government is working towards it. For instance, I notice the allocations of budget under Narega being preferential towards broadband connectivity and actually it being done on a mission mode. We need to do much more because access by itself will require monitoring. And here is where civil society comes in. Here is where people who have worked at the grassroots, who know these implementation mechanisms, the gaps which occur, the larger civil society, which has shown a certain level of resilience comes in. And this is what resilience and opportunity means to me. It is to ensure that the social impact we are causing actually increases alongside technology. And this is the positive message. In my own work, I have noticed that while access is increasing, internet shutdowns are also increasing. Large parts of our country actually suffer from internet shutdowns, which are not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but in Rajasthan, but in also spaces in West Bengal, where the internet is just turned off, still viewed as a convenience or a luxury. However, quite often state governments forget that their very e-governance services are dependent on the internet. So these appeals towards reason need to be made with increasing regularity. There are websites which are blocked, censorship which is caused. So it also puts a much larger question. As access to the internet does increase, we have to also ensure that the internet as a transformational technology, which allows people to not only receive information, but actually be participants and be speakers for the first time in their lives to large audiences in a frictionless manner. And several nonprofits are working on these kind of solutions, are actually supported because one, through this level of participation will actually achieve the level of democracy which is threatened today, and it will take a lot of work. At the same point in time, we are also surrounded by threats of how our data is captured and stored, how both governments and the private sector utilize it, where there are certain conceptions of data only as property, only as oil. However, there are much richer visions as well of how it can be fit within and placed within a human rights framework where there can be rights which can come across. And the parliamentary panels are having deliberations on this. These are engaged issues, but what it would benefit from would be more non-governmental actors, more sector-specific organizations who can explain the impacts and the benefits of electronic databasing, of gathering personal information and utilizing it in a manner which actually preserves the autonomy of the individual as well as caters to the larger social interest. And I think these solutions are possible because we have started these conversations and we are looking towards technology towards doing this. So what are some lessons I've taken away personally over this year? And my colleagues, which include Anushka, Devdata, Dharampalji, Farkhanda, Rohin, Shivani, Vrinda, a lot of them lawyers, technologists, and the larger community of artists and designers who we've collaborated with over the year taken away and given to us in terms of learnings. The first is to collaborate, and I think all of us do a fairly good job of it. But there's a need to deepen that commitment in terms of actually sharing our work, actually learning from others. One such young movement we learned from this year has been the Fridays for Future India chapter, Let India Breathe, and the other environmental groups, where after the net neutrality movement, which actually gave birth to the Internet Freedom Foundation, if you may remember Save the Internet, I was a part of that as well, along with other co-founders, which helped achieve a degree of liberty for people to access the internet without their internet service providers telling them what they could access and what they could not access. So a question arose quite often due to that success, which set a very high bar. Can you replicate that success? Can you get people to engage with government to such a high volume degree and actually make it a public issue? And we couldn't. We looked towards different kinds of solutions, but what was lacking actually was a decentralized leadership, a greater degree of parting with the messaging and explaining it and making it into a much more diversified whole in which people could bring their daily concerns in a much more tangible way. And there's no greater issue than climate justice, and the environmental groups who have been working on it essentially composed of young people. They are people who are young adults, either in school or in the early years of college, who have been leading it, who've told us how to use digital platforms not only as communication tools, but as organizing as well as participatory technologies. And I would encourage everyone to learn from the young as I keep doing it. The second thing is to remember that our work, as much as is important, and my work, as much as is important, is incredibly complex for the ordinary public to understand. This works on vectors of policy change, but also in terms of the implementation frameworks and the highly systemized processes we follow to ensure efficiency, reduce risk, and ensure the proper outcomes are met. The public who we serve are our ultimate beneficiaries, but are also our core supporters at IFF. And I believe it is there for a large number of non-profits working in this sector. So why do we do such a poor job of talking to them? It is because we are talking to them in the language that we understand rather than in the language that they understand. And secondly, that communication is aimed towards essentially quite often explaining solutions rather than jointly discovering them. So we have tried to do that more often now, inviting inputs, trying to break down things with infographics, and also adopting elements of humor, culture, and art. And I would encourage others to also experiment, be a little cheeky, and to ground their work in human sensibilities, which actually enable people to view the work, which is much more boorish, which may be much more detail oriented, and interest them and hook them into the social value it's providing. Also, there is a greater amount of value I've seen in terms of the intersection of technology with different areas of work. So it's bringing that level of collaboration in a very natural way. For instance, just as contact tracing became a very big issue, models around it were also discussed. What can be a good way to ensure both the privacy of a person when they provide data for medical healthcare surveillance, at the same point in time enable early detection as well as diagnostics and possibly any kind of medical redress which is necessary at risk for people at risk of COVID or those who are infected with COVID. And I think here we took in an immense amount of learning from groups and public health movements such as the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan, which explained how lists of people who were infected with COVID, which were put out in public by certain public departments, which in fact invite a level of social shame and thereby make the disease a taboo and prevent people who are infected from actually seeking medical attention. And this came from their large amount of experience of dealing with tuberculosis. And we learned through this. We applied these learnings in our own understanding of the right to privacy, what is the level of confidentiality which must be necessary for patient data. And we've taken this forward. Now, finally, I would also like to take this opportunity to, as we look towards the next year, to actually think about what these opportunities may mean not only for next year, but over the longer course of time. Because the goals that we are quite often looking at may be implementable over longer terms. One key learning which I've taken away from a paper which was written by Ben Hayes and Poonam Joshi, which is titled as Rethinking Civic Space in an Age of Intersectional Crisis. And it's a briefing book for funders, may be actually useful. As much as the Internet Freedom Foundation relies on individual donations primarily made by Indian individuals, and we do not receive large donor or institutional funding, I think it's quite instructive to also think how we should think when we receive support, we ask for support, but also if there are any funders who are listening to this who may also be thinking in these same ways, how they can help uh, uh, make sure that these opportunities realize in future. So actually the takeaway there, and I'll quote is, finally, in this broader and more ambitious horizon for civic space, there is an obvious need to resource these efforts at scale over a long time frame that reflects both the sustained effort that will be required and the urgency of the challenges we face, particularly but not the least in the case of climate change. It goes back to the environment, but this learning, I think so, can be applied to so many other areas of work, such as health, nutrition, such as education, such as core digital rights work, which we do, which is essentially fundamental rights at the intersection of technology. These are ambitious goals. It will take time, and we need to be gentle to ourselves. And if only we are gentle to ourselves, we'll be gentle to our colleagues and to others. This doesn't mean that there'll be any less of determination, and we will carry on, I'm quite sure. But please congratulate yourself and your colleagues for sticking it out this year. It's been a terrible year, as I said when I started. But what we can do for future and thinking about the future may be a bit more optimistic. And here I would like to end by a quote from Octavia Butler. She's a science fiction author, and she wrote an essay called A Few Rules for Predicting the Future. And I'll just quote from that. Uh, she says she says about the future that because most of all, our tomorrow is the child of our today, through thought and deed, we exert a great deal of influence over this child, even though we can't control it absolutely. It's best to think about it though, but best to try to shape it into something good. Best to do that for any child. So our future is a child. We can only give it a level of guidance. We need to acknowledge the externality there. And this is what I try to do in my own work. As much as I see threats and challenges increasing, this is what gives me hope. This is what provides me that level of ambition. And I hope to share this message of optimism with all of you as much as I enrich myself from the optimism that I receive from each one of you today.
Thank you, Apar. Should we start with some questions for you that we have from the audience? Have we lost Apar or are you still on?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit about IFF's experience with fundraising and building a community online?
So essentially, when we started IFF, we, as a lawyer, I looked very closely at the regulations and the kind of work we wanted to do. And we very quickly discovered that we needed not only a degree of regulatory flexibility, but also we needed to do something which actually served the constituency and also fundraised from that same constituency. So we use technology very strongly towards creating a system of recurring individual donations, and we promoted that. And these donors actually pre-authorize debit, credit, or e-mandates across 5 plans. And we have about 260 individual donors, which actually help us meet about, I would say, about 60% to 70% of our running expenses on a month-to-month basis. Um, uh, uh, Again, it's necessary to understand we're a small organization, and we've done it in a community oriented model. What we actually mean by communities, we open up our work to them. So for instance, we have a forum where we invite views on each element of our work, and it's difficult to manage, but I'll tell you it's worth it. It makes it richer. The second is we do quarterly calls for them, in which we actually tell them honestly what were the setbacks, what did we achieve, how we use that money. So, and it's all on YouTube. So we do it in a very transparent way. Every month also, we put out how much we actually received from people. We still have to come up with a good system for expense site reporting, but it'll be implemented in 2 or 3 months. So essentially, you're building trust, forging a strong connection, and you're also being accountable, all within the boundary of regulation. So I'm happy to take much more specific questions around it, but here's the thing I would like to leave you with. It's not like we only had a plan when we started. This plan has been developing. So if I look back to about 2.5 years when I first made my plan for IFF, it's dramatically different from where it is today, also in terms of fundraising. So allow incremental learning all through and continue with it over a period of time. Don't be so bought in. And I know this may be complex and tough for larger organizations, but please, if you are a small team and a young organization, incrementally take in learnings and be open to also acknowledging, hey, I messed up there, I went wrong, and we can quickly pivot to something which works in terms of individual based fundraising.
Hi, Apar. This is Ingrid. I have a question for you. So thank you, first of all, for doing this. It's been uplifting to hear you at a time when we're sort of surrounded by doom and gloom. But one of the reasons, one of the key issues, if you will, that civil society is grappling with is the lack of coordination, coherence, some sort of unified platform to be able to contest some of the forces that we're combating. Do you see a way in which technology might be helpful in actually advancing that agenda of connecting civil society, sort of building the fabric of civil society?
Ingrid, I think a lot of people have excellent ideas here. For instance, I think there was a proposal I read somewhere else by a person who's much more senior than me, that we actually need an organization which serves civil society. So, and I was truly taken back because it seems very simple, basic, and needed, and that's what is the value in great ideas. But much more directly to your question, what can technology do here? I think technology can help build trust, because the thing is that we've never been able to clearly communicate the value proposition of this great work which is being done. And quite often we exist in what is called the civil society bubble. Our comms are so good that they don't reach the right people. I would say we have the problem of being too good, too detail oriented, right? And I'm sorry if I'm being incredibly politically incorrect to a large number of people, but it's a challenge I face in my work, and I'm a lawyer. And guess what? If I can try to be a little less centered towards the detail of a statute or a Supreme Court ruling, I guess it matters to others as well. So I would say we need to center our work again amongst the public. It doesn't matter if you're working in policy implementation, grassroots, and very successful non-profits have done that, where they have taken learnings from movements. So build that trust with that constituency which matters, which we serve, which is the public. And uh, I, I won't have very tangible suggestions to it, because my own constituency is a very easy constituency. It's online already. It's principally technologists, and I may be coming with an incredible amount of bias, but I believe others are in fact touching more people, and the people themselves would really be appreciative of their efforts towards improving their lives. And I believe that once you start communicating it, putting it out there and growing that whole, I believe that the challenges which we are facing will actually be mitigated to some degree, because the public power which comes with serving a constituency and then making that message and taking it to a decision maker will only help improve the odds.
Um, so, Apar, this was the question that came in yesterday and it was asked to Rebecca, but from the global context, and it would be nice to hear it from the India perspective. She talked about the Egyptian uprising, and then how, the internet was used effectively for a great extent to cause movements, like you just said. But now, very recently, the social media and internet's being used in the counter negative way to suppress movements. So, how does civil society function to actually build that counter narrative, or work with that counter? Like you said, civil society is doing great work and existing in its bubble. But how does it work to actually build that counter narrative and put it out there and leverage social media either by individual voices or collective voices? What are your thought processes? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
So, Rebecca is an excellent scholar. She studied censorship in China. And in fact, she's been one of the first scholars who looked at how technology actually can aid authoritarian impulses in countries. So, the Egyptian example actually is also a very complex example, because it precedes a high degree of economic inequality, spikes in wheat prices, and almost near certain famine, okay, due to environmental change also. So what happens is that while this is happening, there's a long-serving autocrat, and they do an internet shutdown, but also when the first protests emerge, which could have dissipated very easily, miscalculates the level of political power and crushes them, which causes loss of life. So it doesn't do it in a good manner. So the narrative with respect to the Egyptian uprising is very properly captured in a book by Zainab Tufekci called Twitter and Tear Gas, where she actually juxtaposes that with the larger movement of globalization and systems change. And she says that we don't have all the answers, we'll keep discovering. My basic steer on technologies, it's not neutral, so we need to engage. And this goes especially for a lot of people who have not engaged with technology, who don't see technology as an inherent part of their work. So I remember in 2012 when I went to an a, a, older non-profit which worked on civil liberties, and I said that, hey, people are being put in jail because of their online posts. They said, yes, but people are being put in jail in XYZ regions for opposing the government for doing XYZ on their land, which is a much more immediate concern for us, because the right to protest in that situation takes preference, right? So I believe that as much as we need to serve constituencies which don't have power primarily, ignoring technology is at our own peril. It offers great and tremendous opportunity. Now, with respect to authoritarianism and any framework of power, just how we should conceptualize how monetary institutions essentially shifted away from being a way of trade and commerce, which could enrich the small shop holder, and is resulting in a degree of economic inequality, we should think about technology in the same way. Be critical, but be positive. And there are examples there. Open sourcing is an example there. And I don't think so. The government, for everything that it does, is so opposed to all elements of beneficial technology by itself. So to grow that instinct, to encourage it, even in my line of work, is possible. For instance, we have had this, and I'll just take one instance to demonstrate that this is possible. For instance, we have heard so much about regulation of OTT platforms, but many people don't know that the Ministry of Electronics and IT actually went in court about 1.5 years ago and said that no, we don't think so that we should censor online streaming portals because it just won't be possible. We don't think so we can extend the Cinematograph Act. Now, after 1.5 years, the challenge to me as well as so many of my colleagues who work in digital rights is for the government to be encouraged and to hold the line, to actually send it letters and say that, hey, you did a good, great thing, and stop the siege mentality which may exist with them as much with us. And I know it's tough. I know it sometimes is very challenging, but I think these small opportunities exist where you can actually try to extend them and make them into a greater and a bigger space of work.
Apar, if I can jump in again, it seems like, and we've seen this over the last 2 days as well, that for the vast majority of NGOs who are literally struggling to survive on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we've, between COVID and PM CARES and now FCRA and CSR, likely to drop, we're looking at some of the bleakest sort of prospects for the sector over the next 12 months.
Yes.
I mean, literally existential sort of threats. What can those of you that focus on these issues, digital rights, democratic freedoms, do more or do better to get the rest of us to take some time off from just keeping ourselves going to engage on these issues? I mean, what will it take to get mainstream civil society to engage on the issues that you are focused on? What can you do more of that will allow this to happen?
Ingrid, I think it's happening very naturally. So there are unfortunately, there are certain impulses which are driving the much more harmful impacts of technologies towards vulnerable communities. For instance, there's been a protest in Chandigarh for forcing garbage cleaners to wear GPS devices, which would essentially prevent unionization, because there are no unions, there are informal unions in Chandigarh. So it's also a employee tracking tool, and I think it's very invasive. So we are working with different groups, but the thing is, it's for me to actually do. I take a whole degree of responsibility for this because the digital rights sector has been dominated by lawyers. It's been incredibly patriarchal. I don't only mean in terms of a gender identity, I mean just in terms of how it's structured. It prescribes rather than listens. And the third is it's entirely English based. It's completely so elite, and I know I need to do better. We are trying to do better. I can't change myself, but what I can do is that the work itself can integrate more people within it, and this needs to go beyond what may be our usual and comfortable partners as tick boxes for diversity, to actually growing that level of diversity. So it's actually a challenge to the digital rights community, which is a very young sector within the larger mainstream of civil society, of health, of education, which have been working for a longer period of time. So we need to listen more and open our ears. The second thing I'll say is that for people who are facing these challenges, smaller groups across states, and there's so many NGOs, it's tough. One of the things which they need to implement urgently is online donations, individual giving, and also think about making their work more visible, they need to do that. And digital technologies will help them do it and achieve it. I know Osama, who gave a keynote last year, has been a co-supporter here, offers a certain degree of support here as well. I know he ran a program towards creating websites for other civil society organizations. And we at IFF have just implemented a system for online giving, but there are others as well who are implementing it without coding as well. Invest in these systems. I would really urge you, diversify your ability to receive money, to receive help, and please don't be shy to receive and ask for help. I do it on a monthly basis. We're doing good work. So just one personal story. I come from a business class family. These kind of things are very alien in terms of the social values which dominate there. One day I'm sitting with my dad. He's saying that, oh, you switched from a lucrative commercial practice to asking for chanda. And then he looks at my face and the slight amount of grimace. And then he says that, no, it's a good thing because asking for chanda is a good thing. And a lot of people do it. And it's part of old Indian and Buddhist customs. So I was like, thank you so much, but I know you don't mean it. So at least people are saying it, and please don't feel that level of shame ever. Ask for help, ask for it openly, and please also just one offer I'd like to make. If any of my remarks may not have been of value, but this may be of value. If you want to set up individual donations or you want to learn more about IFF's membership program, how to make it more in terms of what you get, if you need to make merch, if you need to give stickers, grow a community, write personal letters, I'm here. I'll make time for you. Okay. I may not be able to service everyone, but I'll try to provide as much time as possible to people. You just need to reach across to me, and I'm accessible online.
So, Apart, this is a slightly different question. I mean, you're talking about organizations going online, and we've heard a number of them. Osama did a session in the right now a couple of hours ago, and we heard a couple of others like BBC Media Action Lab and others using a lot of beneficiary data, right? Taking it from the government, taking it from the ground. Now, what are the correct practices, right? When are we sort of going over the boundary and actually using data in the, I don't know, the data privacy laws? I know there is a law that you can't necessarily collect Aadhaar numbers and just put them anywhere, but then there must be a whole bunch of others.
So
And how does civil society work around this?
So I think the conceptualization essentially has to be what is within the data set, and also focus on the autonomy of the individual. And I think because you're focusing on human capacity development, looking at actually delivering the best benefits to people, if it's not possible, then actually with the government partnerships that you have is at least prompt a conversation that are you taking informed consent for the data you're collecting from the individuals. But if it's NSSO data, for instance, there is a level of obligation on individuals to provide it. And we have come to live with that compromise. I think a lot of clarity will be provided when Parliament makes the data protection law, and it has exceptions for research. But also with those exceptions for research, there will be still clear regulatory guidance, and it will impact a large Silicon Valley company very differently from the non-profit sector. Again, here the non-profit sector needs to watch out what may be its possible impacts. And on our part at IFF, we'll make sure that the actual operational needs of non-profits is reflected. More tangibly, what we have done in the past is that there was a degree of concern that a privacy law will impact the transparency efforts, which are quite necessary in rural communities to ensure entitlements are received by them. And we have worked very closely with the right to information campaigns and movements to ensure these impacts do not of privacy, which is quite often cited as a barrier for disclosure of how public funds are being used, impact them as well. So I think the conception about privacy as well as the conception about the information that you need has to be within the larger understanding of power. It should reside with the individual, and we aim towards social justice rather than about making the individual transparent and vulnerable.
So I think,
All
Ingrid,
right,
do you
if
have any more
I can,
questions? Or
yeah, one more question, just one more question. How, yesterday we hosted a gathering of philanthropists, and these were philanthropists who all are interested in funding the development of tech, the use of tech, the dissemination of tech, and then just building greater awareness of what tech can do in the social sector. But there are literally, a handful of them. I mean, like literally everyone who's interested in the topic was in the room. And that was 24 people at best. How do you have a plan or an idea or a suggestion on how we can how can we bring more philanthropists to this table at a time when philanthropy is already facing, huge demands? COVID alone hasn't gone away yet. It's still needing huge sums of money. All the SDGs are, we've fallen behind thanks to COVID. And so, we need to double down on that. How at such a time, what's the argument you make at this time to a philanthropist to say, but you need to also do this?
I think the way I view my own work is that it'll never be complete, but I hope that I'm not no longer needed. And I think that should also be the end goal of philanthropy. And it will never be achieved. But what may help us reach closer to that goal is essentially making sure that organizations who are working on these ambitious human problems, which will always be there, are self-sustaining. So uh, making sure that they reach that degree of financial sustainability is already there as a core element of grant making for philanthropists. And they should extend that to tech development. We should have 20 different platforms which encourage individual giving, which onboard nonprofits onto technology tools which allow them to do the work they were doing pre-COVID, even do it in a much better way. Training, resourcing, regulatory compliances, which take so much of our time and can actually dull people, especially young people who come with incredible passion towards changing the world, needs to be actually put back in that smaller box which is there, so we can open up the bigger problems which are there in possibly rooms, houses, villages, and cities. So I would just urge philanthropists to look at technology as an enabling tool for civil society focus. And a lot of philanthropists in India actually have made and actually understand technology very well. They come from these sectors. So let us grow technology to support the non-profit sector and make those investments which make it more sustainable. And I think that will be a good goal which aligns with their existing values as well as the grant making.
I know you're overstretched, Apar, in your day job, but perhaps you need to start a side venture just in coaching and capacity building for nonprofits as well as for
Not at all,
philanthropists.
Ingrid. To again with the same degree of honesty, where I said that it's been a terrible and a horrible year. I really do think that I'm learning. I honestly think, and the things that I say and the way that I say it, I quite often feel nervous and insecure saying them. So I really do thank you and your colleagues for inviting me here. And I hope if I said something off key, please do take it that I'll learn better. It's just been about 2.5 years for me in the nonprofit sector, but each day is something I've looked forward to. And this is the same message I carry towards the next year. It does make me smile as much as we've all suffered so much loss.
Yeah, I'm in my third decade now in the nonprofit sector. I can only tell you it gets better. Thank you.